Chapter 6, The Shame of the Queen. Lord Melbourne and Lord George were travelling in a carriage through the crowded streets of London. George had several newspapers on his legs and showed them to Lord Melbourne while reading the headlines. "Look at this. Declaration of love on the Privy Council, this other, passionate words of love from the Lord to the Queen. Lord Melbourne has heart and it beats for the Queen. From politician to walking knight. Lord Melbourne comes out in defence of the Queen's honour with a romantic speech. Lord Melbourne, man in love or a clever opportunist?" The day that Lord Melbourne confessed his love for the Queen before the great men of the kingdom. Lord Melbourne faces Cumberland to defend the Queen, and so many other starters. You must recognise that some are funny and some witty, and of course, some are fools, said George with a funny and ironic smile. Although I should not be surprised after many years of confronting the press of this country, I confess that I am somewhat offended because a press magnate taking advantage of his position as a member of the Privy Council to obtain a copy of the transcript of my speech and publish it as an exclusive in their newspapers, of course causing the competition newspapers to be forced to transcribe the speech too, and to comment it exhaustively, for good or ill, said Lord Melbourne with some annoyance. Well, William, how many times does the Privy Council meet to advise on the marriage of a reigning monarch? It is an event through which we have to wait for entire generations, and also to occur in the context of a projected controversial marriage, and by itself was little with the presence of the eventual consort of the Queen uttering an inspired and wonderful speech. Well, that must occur once in several centuries, as a very rare conjunction of the stars. Can you blame the owner of some big print newspapers for wanting to make an exclusive of it? George replied truthfully. Of course. I'm glad there are people taking advantage of this marriage, Lord Melbourne said wryly. Most people in England would think you're the main beneficiary, William, George replied politely. Most people are not in my place and do not know my heart, replied Lord Melbourne soberly and sadly. George turned to see him and recognized his friend's uneasiness. I thought things were better with Victoria after yesterday, George said worriedly. I was emotionally altered. Of course, I wanted to be protective and generous with Victoria, I wanted to comfort her because I cannot stand to see her suffer. You know better than anyone what I feel for her. But as I told her, the darkness has not died out in my heart and it may that never extinguishes. I feel a lot of pain and rage, and I still do not know how to live with her, after what she did, answered Lord Melbourne candidly. And do you think your conversation with her today could make things worse? George asked worriedly. I would like to say no. But I'm afraid so, Lord Melbourne acknowledged. My friend, try to be patient and generous. Remember your mother, and remember that you love that girl. Listen to her with your heart and without prejudice, for her and for you, George said, patting him on the knee. I'll try, George. I'll try, Lord Melbourne answered truthfully. The carriage stopped at the front door of Buckingham Palace, and Lord Melbourne was about to get out of the carriage. I'll come and fetch you at the appointed time, said George. Thank you, George, for everything, said Lord Melbourne. Do not worry, Luck, William, George said. Lord Melbourne entered the palace as the carriage departed. They led him to the antechamber of the Queen's private quarters, and I wait there, impatient and anguished, as if I feared his encounter with Victoria. She arrived after a few minutes, and seemed more nervous and frightened than him. She approached Lord Melbourne slowly. Ma'am. Victoria, said Lord Melbourne uncertainly on what to call her, and went to take her hand to kiss her, but after a few moments of nervous indecision, he brought his face to kiss her cheek, and she came to make it easier. Lord M. William, how was your night? After dinner, Victoria asked friendly and trying to smile, but very nervous to get it right. Well, on leaving, we went to George's house and had a few drinks and talked a bit before retiring to sleep, Lord Melbourne replied, trying to sound calm even though he was tense. Lord George is very nice. I would like him to visit us frequently here in Buckingham after the wedding, to invite him and his wife. Victoria said pleasantly and sincerely. His wife lives in Ireland and never comes to England, they are separated in fact. But that's a long story, for another day, Lord Melbourne replied as though it were a subject he did not like to talk about. I understand, Victoria said, somewhat puzzled and uncomfortable, as if she had made a mistake. Victoria, allow me to suggest that we sit down, said Lord Melbourne somewhat impatiently. Yeah, sure, let's sit down, Victoria said. She sat down first, as usual, and he sat down, in front of her. They were both silent for a moment. I've seen the newspapers, most have a favourable view of your speech in the council. I think it is something positive for the debate in Parliament, Victoria said anxiously and trying to sound optimistic. I certainly think the press approach is the best we could hope for, Lord Melbourne replied. Victoria hoped he would say something more, to delay the inevitable moment a little. But at the silence and the gesture on his face, she realized that he did not want to wait any longer. So she swallowed thick, and made an effort to begin. William, this is very difficult for me. And it is difficult because I care much what you think of me and I have never wanted to disappoint you, I have always wanted your approval. And so I feel a deep shame, to have to confess this. I expect your indulgence, even if I do not deserve it, Victoria said, her voice broken with emotion. I just want the truth, Victoria. Only the truth will give us a chance, someday to sort things out, replied Lord Melbourne sincere and serious, but calm. Of course. It all happened when Albert was about to leave for his country, Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Victoria trembled as she spoke, twisting her hands in a nervous gesture. She looked down, for she did not dare to see Lord Melbourne's eyes, and her voice was broken by emotion, as if at any moment she might burst into tears. I really did not want him to go back to his country, because I did not want to part with him. Victoria lifted her head a little and could see the pain reflected on Lord Melbourne's face, which made her feel a twinge of pain too, and guilt over his suffering. But I understood that he must go, that he could not ignore the call of his father from which he was to be separated most of the rest of his life, by marrying me. To say this, Victoria felt another pang of pain, but this time by Albert, and some tears appeared in her face, which did not go unnoticed for Lord Melbourne, who felt more hurt and that he also had to resolve their pending affairs, waiting that the obstacles to marriage in Parliament were overcome. Anyway, I felt sad and somewhat nervous, so before his departure we had a happy family dinner to say goodbye to him and Ernest. But at the end of dinner, he and me wanted to continue talking, we did not want to part so quickly. Victoria felt very bad, knew that her words were hurting Lord Melbourne, no matter how she tried to relativize or soften the story of the facts. The truth was of course harder for him. That night they did not want to part because they wanted to continue enjoying the new experience of kissing and caressing each other. But Victoria sensed that Lord Melbourne's mind filled the blank lines of her story, because he was not a fool, and that hurt him more and by extension to her. Then I thought of a craziness, a mischief of a little girl. I got a servant to bring us a pair of bottles of liquor, and with the bottles and some beakers we slipped away to hide from them all and be alone. I asked Miss Scarrat, my personal maid, she made her believe Lazen that I had already gone to bed and was sleeping, but in reality Albert and me took refuge in the antechamber of my rooms to talk alone. Albert did not want to drink much, but I convinced him to do it, I insisted, I begged and I challenged him to get it. So we started drinking a lot, laughing. And between kisses and caresses, but that Victoria did not say. You know that alcohol does not suit me very well, you will remember the ball of coronation. Victoria continued with a small sad smile as she recalled the sweet moment when a more naive Victoria waited uselessly for a kiss from Lord Melbourne when they both drew too close together a hallway, and Albert also did not stand up very well, he was not used to drinking much either. So we were both very drunk, exalted and uninhibited by the liquor. At one point, Albert began to comment that his brother wanted to take him to a place of those, of ladies of the night. Of course I was angry, but he reassured me and told me that he did not want to go, and that if Ernest had forced him to go, he would only have asked a series of questions to those women about the carnal act. That seemed funny to me, and then we started talking about it, and Victoria broke off, and Lord Melbourne saw that she was making a great effort to continue. But Victoria saw the intense glance of Lord Melbourne and remembered her promise to tell him everything, and gathered strength to follow. Albert and me did not want to fail our duty, we did not want to dishonour our names and our position, but we did not know what we were doing. Drunkenness erased any prudence or sense of decency, and one thing led the other. I recognize for my dishonour and to vindicate a little the memory of Albert, who at first I took the initiative. Saying this, Victoria saw a grimace of anger and displeasure on Lord Melbourne's face, which made her feel her legs tremble, but then he responded with enthusiasm, with too much enthusiasm. In his naivety and outburst he acted with awkwardness and a certain brutality, and I was a little frightened to see what I had caused. Even for a moment I regretted it, and I asked him to stop. Said Victoria, very embarrassed and distressed. He forced you? Asked Lord Melbourne with an exclamation of bewilderment and rage. No. I later agreed. In his outburst he told me words, sweet and passionate, that made me to cede. Victoria replied and felt more anguish as Lord Melbourne turned his face so as not to see her face, with a gesture of anger and contempt on his face. Victoria was silent for a moment while she waited for some reaction from him, but when there was no reaction, she continued. The next day Lazan and Scarrett surprised us still asleep in my bedroom. Lazan was very hurt and disappointed, and that hurt me a lot because she is like a mother to me, and having failed her that way is the worst thing I could do. Even so, she acted quickly and cautiously to eliminate the evidence of our sin. Lord Melbourne squeezed the backs of the chairs so hard he thought he could break them. He had no difficulty imagining what those evidences would be. Victoria's sheets and garments stained with her blood of deflowered virgin and the cum of the bastard Albert. Suddenly the images of both having sex returned to his mind, and he felt nauseous, even wanting to vomit. I was deeply ashamed and regretful of my embarrassing and unforgivable behavior, and Albert too. We were both suffering greatly from guilt. But we consoled ourselves by telling ourselves that we would soon be married, and that would erase our guilt and dishonor, and perhaps in time we would even remember it as an anecdote. I dismissed Albert with a great anguish united to the sadness I already felt for separating from him, but with the hope of getting married soon. But then the tragedy happened. Albert's murder just 2 days after arriving in his country. For me it was a horrible nightmare, and everything got worse when Miss Scarrett recognized in me the early signs of a pregnancy, and she advised me to go to the doctor of the court. He confirmed the worst news to me, and then I had to tell my mother and my uncle everything. Of course they were devastated and furious, fearing that it would be the end of my reign and the ruin of my maternal family. The rest of the story, you already know. Lord M. Lord Melbourne rose from his chair in a rather abrupt manner, not caring that Victoria was still sitting, forgetting protocol. Then he went to a window and stared out into the palace garden, trying to calm himself. Victoria got to her feet, and walked a few steps toward him, full of anxiety, shame, and fear. Lord M., please forgive me. Do not be quiet, tell me something, whatever, Victoria begged. On one occasion, when the bedchamber crisis, you told me you forget yourself, you reminded me of my place. We both know that in this room there are 2 people who are not on an equal plane, and because of that inequality I cannot tell you what I feel. Or would you be willing to give up that privilege to hear me speak with absolute sincerity? Said Lord Melbourne without ceasing to see the outside, without looking at her. William, of course I want you to speak to me with absolute sincerity, for better or for worse, because I care about your feelings, and also because I do not consider that we are unequal, especially since we are going to get married, Victoria said sincerely. All right, Victoria. Your conduct is reprehensible, absolutely reprehensible, and unforgivable. Lord Melbourne replied with a hard look and glance, turning to see her. Lord M. cried Victoria in amazement and pain, tears streaming down her eyes. I cannot say otherwise, in any young, single woman it would be a reprehensible behaviour, but in a Queen of England who ought to be exemplary in her conduct, it is absolutely intolerable, said Lord Melbourne, speaking to her with uncharacteristic harshness. Victoria stepped back, feeling as if he had slapped her. But I did not want to. It was an accident, a mistake. I'm sorry to cause you this pain. But I'm also feeling a lot of pain. Victoria exclaimed in tears. Pain. Pain is to grow in an unhappy family full of painful secrets. Pain is to see your older brother die when he was still very young. Pain is you marry a woman you were in love, to create your own family and see how everything collapses around you. It is to see your first child born to be the victim of a cruel congenital disease that makes him an idiot or a madman in the eyes of the world. It is to see your daughter die the same day she was born. It is to see your wife being unfaithful, fall in love with another man and go with him, then she return shattered and crazy. It is having to endure for almost 10 years a public scandal that makes you the most despised and humiliated man in the country. It is to see your mother die, probably the only person who really loved you in this life, and then see die to the mother of your children, and finally see your son die, your boy whom you took care of with devotion during all his painful life of illness. And when you believed that you could no longer suffer, you meet a young woman and you fall in love with her as a fool, even though you know it's a forbidden love for you, and although it makes you feel alive again, soon the pain returns. Because pain is having to reject the woman's declaration of love that you love to protect her and save her from a dark destination. Pain, ma'am, is to see later that woman fall in love too fast with another man, a young man, and see them both engage in marriage and you have to suffer to see that you will lose her forever in the arms of him. And when that marriage is truncated by a tragedy and you feel compassion for her, the pain hurts again, because that woman you love has lost her virginity and has become pregnant with the other man, and you have to endure the humiliation and the unloving. That is pain, madam. Lord Melbourne said, emotional and angry, his eyes bright and his gesture hard. Victoria was shocked, crushed by the contempt and reproach of her beloved Lord Melbourne, and suffering from the pain she saw in his face. Lord M., I know your life has been very painful, and I despise myself for causing you hurt. But I want. Victoria tried to say, crying. You love him? Lord Melbourne asked, not hiding the grudge in his voice. Albert. He's dead, Willie. Victoria replied, surprised and to defensive way. That's not my question, ma'am. Did you love him? Do you still love him despite being dead? He asked with an accusatory tone, like that of a rude cop in an interrogation of a delinquent. Victoria felt trapped and desperate, not knowing what to say, feeling pain for both men, for Lord Melbourne and for Albert. I loved him. I guess I still love him. But that does not mean. Victoria answered, trying to explain. So, ma'am, what you felt for me was a simple infatuation that quickly dissipated, said Lord Melbourne without mercy. Victoria suffered for that new verbal slap. That's not fair. You rejected me. I was heartbroken and Albert made me feel idolized, loved. He was in love with me and made me believe that I did not have to live life alone, that his love could take away from me sadness and loneliness, replied Victoria, almost furious, without ceasing to cry. I understand, ma'am. I can understand it. A life of loneliness is terrible, I know from experience. And I'm sorry that the man you love is dead. Believe me that I am sincere when I tell you that I am sorry that you have not been able to marry him, and that you have to marry a man you do not love, Lord Melbourne said sadly, and looked back to the window. Victoria froze, bewildered. Then she reached out, as if she wanted to touch him with her hand, but not daring to do so, full of compassion for him. Lord M., why do you think I do not love you? Why? Victoria asked. You said it, Victoria. You love him, Lord Melbourne answered, as if his mind were somewhere far away. But although it is difficult to understand, I never forgot you. A part of my heart was still yours, when I was with Albert, even in those days of euphoria, because for start of engagement of him and me, I sometimes remembered you, I could not help it. I was confused, but I was trying to get you out of my head because I wanted concentrate on trying to be happy with Albert. But I knew that a part of me still loved you and would probably never stop doing it, that's why I even had rehearsed a little speech to tell you the day of my wedding, to tell you that in spite of everything you would always be part of my heart. I feel that the love I felt on the day of our meeting at Brocket Hall never died completely, even though for a time my love for Albert has overshadowed it. I know it may sound frivolous and even reprehensible, but I think I have been in love two men at the same time for different reasons. And I think I now have the opportunity to love you without reservations with all my heart, as I wanted that day at Brocket Hall, said Victoria, very emotional, as if she were declaring his love again. Lord Melbourne closed his eyes with a gesture as if he were exhausted, a gesture that did not go unnoticed for Victoria. He was silent for a few moments, then opened his eyes and spoke sadly, turning to see Victoria. My experience with women tells me that when a woman is in love with a man and then falls in love with another man, for whatever reason, she simply cannot love the first man again, said Lord Melbourne with ill-concealed pain. Are you comparing me to Lady Caroline? That's not fair, William. I'm not Caroline, and my story has nothing to do with her story with Lord Byron. I was not married to you, I was not unfaithful to you. I would never be unfaithful to you. I will respect our marriage vows, not because I fear the punishment of God or because it is my duty as a woman and queen, but because you believe it or not, I love you too much to make you such humiliation and cause you so much pain, said Victoria, sincere and excited, and then she extended her arm and dared to take it by the hand. I told you that a part of my heart never ceased to be yours. We can both be happy together. You do not think I can give you my heart for Albert, no matter how much it hurts, he's dead. His memory will fade to be a memory, a sweet memory, it is true, but a memory. Albert will not be a ghost that will stand between us and which will prevent me from giving you the happiness and love to which you have the right, said Victoria with sweetness and affection. You're wrong, Victoria. Or will not his ghost live on his child? Replied Lord Melbourne, expressionless. Victoria felt a new twinge of pain, and she slowly let go of Lord Melbourne's hand as tears threatened to spring back into her eyes. Lord M., the child will never know who his father is. I swear I will not allow it. My family will not be able to tell him anything, the child will only know a father, and it will be you. Victoria said desperately to calm Lord Melbourne. You're wrong about that. The child will know the truth, because I will tell him the truth, Lord Melbourne replied with a serious tone and a hard face. But Lord M. Victoria cried anguished. Every man and woman deserves to know who his real father is. Every person has the right to know their origin. The worst sin a mother can commit is to hide from her child the truth about his fatherhood. And that holds true for any mother, including the Queen of England, Lord Melbourne said reproachfully. Victoria froze at Lord Melbourne's words and felt her body tremble. I just did not want to deprive my child of having a wonderful father, just like you, Victoria said with tears streaming down her cheeks. Please, William, do not punish my child for my sin. Victoria, I'm not a scoundrel. I am not John Conroy. I would never hurt a child, unless after my son's death. Replied Lord Melbourne, and his voice cracked, and he had to turn his face away so she would not see him cry, overcome at last by the emotions of that dramatic encounter. Victoria also broke down when she saw him cry, and without thinking she approached him from behind, and put her small hand on his shoulder. Forgive me, it seems that all I do is hurt you. Victoria exclaimed as she pouted and sobbed. Victoria, please. I am tired and overwhelmed, every man has a limit and I am no exception. I just want a break, a break. I do not want to think. I don't want to feel, said Lord Melbourne downcast, trying to regain his composure. Lord Melbourne slowly turned away from her, turning his back on her, while Victoria continued to cry and looked at him anxiously. He turned and spoke to her, trying to pretend that he had regained his composure. "Do not worry, I just need to think about what we've talked about and take it in. But I feel that London suffocates me, the whole city, even my own house in Brocket Hall. I need some peace to think and calm down. I think it's best for both of us, because being altered I'm no good for anything. As the process of approving marriage in Parliament has just begun, I have sufficient time. That is why I have accepted the invitation of my friend George to spend a few days in his country residence in Cornwall. I think that I can be in peace and calm my nerves, and ponder better. Surely when I return I will be better able to face the whole wedding process, which will not be easy because there will be a strong opposition in Parliament. I think it is the best," said Lord Melbourne, trying to look like when he was Prime Minister and spoke to she of subjects of state. "So, are you leaving?" Victoria asked, making an effort to calm herself and regain her composure, wiping away her tears with one hand. "Only for a few days, Victoria," Lord Melbourne answered, handing Victoria a handkerchief. "Thank you," she said, taking the handkerchief. "I need to get away from everything, even for a short time," insisted Lord Melbourne. "Of everything, of me, too," Victoria replied as a sad statement. Lord Melbourne did not respond and remained serious. "I understand, William. I hope that the stay in Cornwall is for your good, for your peace. I only hope that your reflections help you understand that I am sincere when I tell you that I want to make you happy and give you the love you deserve," said Victoria, affectionately. Lord Melbourne looked down and fell silent. Then they both considered it appropriate to end the meeting and Victoria accompanied him to the hallway outside the room. "See you later, Victoria," said Lord Melbourne, and bent down to kiss the back of Victoria's hand, making her feel disappointed as she awaited a kiss on the cheek. "Until later, Lord M. I will await your return with anxiety." "I'll miss you," said Victoria, excited and sad. Lord Melbourne walked away, his face shadowed by an infinite sadness and his eyes lowered, and he was so distracted that he passed close to Victoria's mother without seeing her or greeting her. The Duchess of Kent saw the look on his face and wisely chose not to speak to him to get his attention. Then she saw her daughter and went to her, worried to see the tears on Victoria's cheeks. "I've told all him, Mama." "Albert and Victoria said in pain and anguish. "Shhh. Shut up, Dina, the walls have ears," said the Duchess nervously, looking back and forth, afraid that some servant would hear a reckless statement from Victoria. "I broke his heart. Once again I hurt him, he is shattered, I had never seen him so desperate and dejected," said Victoria, crying and pouting like a little girl. The Duchess saw her and could not help feeling compassion for her daughter's pain. "Do not be mortified, Dina," said the Duchess, as she hugged her daughter and stroked Victoria's head in a loving and consoling gesture. "Men are like children, they get angry and get depressed for everything, but they soon forget and move on to something else. And Lord Melbourne is in love like a fool of you. That is why it is normal for him to be hurt, but when his stupid pride of wounded man fades and his ridiculous mind of an offended child begins to think clearly, he will realize that he is very fortunate to be able to spend the rest of his life married with the woman who loves. Then he will accept your love enchanted, and you with your caresses and your affection as a woman will make him forget the past. And then you two will finally get away with it, what you two basically wanted from the beginning, that it is to be happy together as in those ridiculous romantic novels that so much like the young ladies your age or in those tales of princesses that Baroness Lazen read to you when you were a little girl. You will see, you just give time that idiot to ponder," added the Duchess, dismissing the matter. "Do not call him that, Mama," Victoria protested as she continued to cry. "It's okay. You're handsome and wonderful, Lord Melbourne." "Happy?" said the Duchess in a mocking tone. Victoria could not help but giggle, and then she saw her mother with tears in her eyes. Do you really think he can get over it? Victoria asked anxiously. Of course. All men look quite like each other in the background. And most are children when they are in love. Your father was also very stupid, in another sense. You will see that in a short time your dear Lord Melbourne will again be the same spellbound fool by your beauty and charm that kissed the road that you walked. You two will be a very cheesy couple without a doubt, replied the Duchess, reassuring and a little mocking. Thanks, Mama. I wish you'd always be so good to me, Victoria said, shaken. I would not be myself, said the Duchess, feeling a little touched as her voice broke, but after a few moments recovered the usual serenity. Come to your bedroom, on your situation, are not suitable strong emotions, you should rest. Both women walked toward the Queen's quarters. Meanwhile Lord Melbourne waited at the entrance to the palace for the arrival of Lord George's carriage, which did not take long to do so. Lord Melbourne got into the carriage and sat down in front of his friend. How? Do not tell me, for your face I imagine it, said George, worried to see the gesture in Lord Melbourne's face. I need to drink a lot today. But there's another thing I need you to do for me, said Lord Melbourne very seriously, between depressed and disgusted. I need you to contact that friend of yours. I want to see Catherine tonight, if that's possible. George could not help feeling a little surprised to hear his friend request the services of the prostitute he had been on the other night. That gave him an idea of the desperate depression in which Lord Melbourne was immersed, of his need to flee from pain and seek solace. Of course, William, as soon as we get home I will send an urgent note to the man, replied George sympathetically and amiably. If Catherine was not available, would you be willing to? I just want to see Catherine, I'm not interested in any other. If she cannot come, I do not want anyone else to come, said Lord Melbourne. I see. Do not worry, George replied. The carriage continued on its way toward Lord George's mansion, while gloomy Lord Melbourne sank into his dark thoughts. I invite you to join the Facebook group, For the Love of Vickburn. In that group many fans of Vickburn we gather in a pleasant atmosphere to enjoy our favorite fandom.